Hello and welcome to our podcast. In today's episode, we will be speaking about evictions.org.za, which is an online guide that will help you to know your rights, understand the legal processes, and to fight your evictions. In today's episode, we have a guest speaker, Sean Russell, who is the project manager who helped to make this possible. He's all the way in Vietnam. Welcome, Sean.
Hi, Zach. Thanks very much for having me. Very nice to be on the podcast.
Great. So, Sean, can you tell us about the online evictions guide? Why did you decide to go online?
Yes, good question. So we also have an offline guide, which is the eviction guide, which is a booklet. It's about between 50 and 70 pages. That we have been distributing throughout Cape Town to help tenants who are vulnerable to eviction kind of understand their rights, understand the legal process, and then take actionable steps so that they can either oppose their eviction or they can go to court and they can get more time, a reasonable amount of time to vacate their properties. So we did it offline first, because that's the market or the target audience that we had at the time. But since then, and we've always wanted to go online, but since then we've kind of done our research and seen that so many people who use the offline guide are also online on spaces like Facebook and WhatsApp, and also have access to the internet. So many people these days have a smartphone. So we decided to take all that information, put it online into a very mobile friendly website. It's almost like an app on the mobile. And what we also built into it when we took it online was that it's super low on data, because we know that in South Africa, I think we're something like 140 in the world for the most expensive cell phone data. So we wanted it to be accessible, but what being online helps us do is it allows us to make important changes, and it also allows us to reach a wider audience, because we can't hand a book to everyone. So online people can share it easily, and they can share it on Facebook. But then it also allows us to create tools and apps online that we can link to the guide that people can then use to follow the steps. So, for example, one of the apps that we're creating at the moment is an app that'll help you collect the important information you need to write an affidavit for opposing your eviction in court. So it's like little things like that can't be done offline. That's why we made it digital.
So just speaking about your audience, we just want to get a clear picture of who is this online guide intended for.
Sure. So the eviction guide, offline and online, is aimed primarily at tenants who live in communities that are vulnerable to eviction, and also to tenants who don't have the financial resources to pay for a lawyer, right? So it's generally people from poorer communities who don't have access to the kind of social support structures and financial support structures that allow them to just phone a lawyer, go in for a consultation, and let the lawyer pay for the lawyer, and then they'll sort it all out if they have an issue.
So we know in areas like Woodstock and Salt River, the areas are heavily affected by gentrification, where we find evictees being sent to relocation camps like Wolverrivier, Blikkiesdorp, and Kampies. But how will this guide help to fight evictions? How will it improve the way we fight against evictions?
Right. So that's the $1 million question. So how is knowing your rights and knowing the legal process actually going to help you? Because in some cases you might know the process perfectly, and you still might get evicted, right? But what we really want the guide to do is give every single tenant and every single family the best opportunity to fight their eviction. If you know your rights and you know the process well, that gives you the best chance you can have of fighting your eviction. Often evictions are actually unlawful, and there's a lot of things that the landlord didn't do correctly, but because people don't go to court and oppose their eviction, that side of the story never comes up. So the judge or the magistrate only sees the landlord's side of the story. They've got one set of facts before them, and they just rubber stamp it, and then the person's evicted without ever having their say in court. So there's a lot of that kind of information that people, if they just knew something and they just did one thing, it would increase their chances of not being evicted by a lot. But, so then there's the other side, is the side where the landlord has done it correctly, has gone through the process appropriately. But if you understand how long the complexity of the process and all the different steps, you can slow it down. And the reason to slow down the process is so that you can put all your personal circumstances in front of the judge or the magistrate, so that when they make their decision, they can make the most just and equitable, the most fair decision possible, right? And what that means is that it has to be in line with the Constitution. And what we see in the Constitution and in court cases around eviction that have gone to the Constitutional Court is that the aim of government, of which the judiciary is a part, the aim is to make sure, and this is what it says in the PI Act, so the Prevention of Illegal Eviction Act, is that no person, basically that the government must not let anybody be evicted into homelessness, right? So what knowing your rights and knowing the process does is it gives you the tools, and especially the tools to buy the time to make sure that you get a reasonable amount of time to find alternative accommodation. So you may still, on the one hand, maybe you are unlawfully evicted, so you know your rights, so you can fight that. But if you are lawfully evicted, you can get a reasonable amount of time to find alternative accommodation. But then, as you say, the only state-funded alternative accommodation is in these terrible relocation camps, which are, those shouldn't exist in 2019.
But if people want to use this guide and for a reason they encounter problems, who can they contact for assistance?
Right. So what I would always say is for people to read through the guide, and at the beginning of the online guide and the paper guide, it kind of gives you an overview of the process. And what I always say to people is find out where you are in the system at the moment, go to that section, study that section, understand what are the next steps you can do now. Because there's always a next step that you can do that you should probably do right away. Because the sooner you do it, the better chance you have in the end, right? So understand your situation, start moving on those actions, and then take a step back and look at the whole system that'll be in the guide. But then on top of that, a space like the Advice Assembly run by Reclaim the City. I think it's on a every Thursday at the Old Woodstock Hospital at 7 p.m. You just correct me if I'm wrong there. So that's a space where we can take that knowledge and we can turn it into action, because there are other people there who've been through this process before. There are other people there are activists there, there are lawyers there. There's a whole support structure that'll give people the confidence and the kind of experience of other people to go and do this. Because it's so difficult to go to court by yourself or to go to the rental housing tribunal by yourself. But if you go with someone who's done it before, then you're going to feel a lot more confident to go and do these kinds of things. And you'll see that there is a system, there is a process, and maybe you'll come out better in the end, and you don't have to be so scared of it.
Yeah. Well, you've actually answered the last question that we had for you, which was what alternative routes people could use to get assistance besides the online guide. Maybe you can just shorten that for us, please. Okay,
cool. Yeah. So I would go to the online guide. I would use the tools there. I would speak to a social movement like Reclaim the City. I would speak to an organization like Ndufuna Okwazi. If you need legal help, I would go to Legal Aid. If you are a South African citizen. If you're not a South African citizen, you can still get free legal advice and free legal representation in regards to evictions. You go to the Legal Practice Council, which used to be called the Cape Law Society. They can put you in touch with a lawyer. Or you can go to university law clinics, like the UCT one. There's one at UWC. There's one at Stellenbosch. And then for Also, for foreign nationals and refugees, they have a specialized refugee law clinic at UCT. So those are the places I would go to first, and then I would also go online and look for support there. But if you go to a space like the Advice Assembly run by Reclaim the City, they'll start putting you in touch with the people that you need to be in touch with.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Sean. That was an insightful conversation. Well, listeners, you've heard it yourself. There's an online eviction guide that can help you to fight or to oppose your eviction. It's called evictions.org.za. So, learn your rights as a tenant and join the struggle against unfair and unlawful eviction in Cape Town. From my side, Zakaria Mashele, thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.